My name is Brian Pugh. I'm the Executive Director of the Brain Injury Association of Maryland. I've been the Executive Director for 8 years, going on 9. And the Brain Injury Association of America and the Brain Injury Association of Maryland was founded in 1983 by parents with kids who had brain injuries, and they really didn't know where to go, where to turn, didn't have any access to resources. And so they found that through each other, that they could broaden their experience and broaden their learning, and now it's become a national organization. So the Brain Injury Association of America is located in Reston, Virginia, and we're located up in Baltimore, right in the University of Maryland Rehabilitation and Orthopedic Institute. We're not part of the university system. We're actually our own 501c3, but we're right outside the largest brain injury unit in the state, which is in that hospital. And so we serve as a resource for the hospital, but we also serve as a resource statewide. And that's how we got involved in this, because we have an 800 number, 1-800-221-6443, for those of you taking notes. We've been seeing an uptick in phone calls from individuals from skilled nursing facilities, families involved, individuals with brain injuries who are in skilled nursing facilities that are finding that they don't have really good answers for handling some of the situations that are coming up. This particular series is, like I said, is a series of 4. The first is Brain Injury 101. That's the one that I'll be presenting this morning. The second is neuronursing. So it's like nursing issues that arise around the individual with brain injury in the nursing facility or in the nursing facility setting. And then the third one is older adults and substance abuse disorders. We're finding a lot of people with substance abuse disorders that are ending up in skilled nursing facilities, and we're going to provide some tools and ideas around that. The fourth is neurobehavioral, and that'll be presented separately from these modules. And at this time, we're going to be doing just the 3 this morning. So thank you all for being here. I appreciate you giving up your Friday morning. And for those of you watching the video, we'll have handouts available and notebooks available as well to sort of galvanize some of these ideas. I do have to apologize that I brought all kinds of stuff this morning. I did not bring my clicker, so I'm going to have to be wandering back and forth to make sure that this goes. But this is Brain Injury 101. So we're going to do the welcome introductions, which you've already talked about. We'll do a couple of questions and answers just to see what you guys know already. We're going to talk a little bit about the definitions in anatomy, because that comes into play when we start talking about behaviors and start talking about techniques and procedures to deal with certain behaviors. And you can get kind of an idea of where in the brain you're dealing with. We're going to talk about TBI and mental health a little bit, because that's something it's critical. And then how to support the individual with TBI. That's when you're working with a client, when you're working with somebody, and how to help them in some procedural things. There's going to be, since this is an introductory module, it's very compact. We've got lots of stuff to go over. This is really kind of like a week-long stuff, and it's always a learning environment. But we're going to try and give you a couple of things just to sort of keep you in mind. And then we're going to talk about some resources that'll be available to you. So in 1848, in Vermont, the railroad was going through a particularly large mountain. They were having to put the railroad track through this particular mountain. And the way they did this back in the 1840s was they would drill a hole in the mountain, they would then put gunpowder in the mountain, in the hole, and then they would take cotton on top of that hole, and then they would take a 13-pound tamping rod. Now 13 pounds is pretty heavy, and it was about 8 feet tall, and it was a big dowel. It was a big, long dowel of metal. And what they would then do is to try and make sure that the gunpowder was all packed down, so that when they blasted it out, it would take the part of the mountain. They would take this 13-pound tamping tool and just pound it in the hole. And that's basically the way they built the railroad back in the 1840s, going through these. So whenever you see a cut in a mountain, you're going to see those striations. You're going to see those holes where they were building them. So Phineas Gage was one of the guys who was in charge of tamping it down. And so one day he was busy. They would drill the hole, they put it in, he'd tamp it down, they'd stand back, they'd blast the hole, they'd blast off the rock. He'd go back in, they'd drill another hole, he'd tamp it down, they'd back out, and they'd blast off the rock. So this particular morning he was in there and he had done it and he was tamping down and somebody called to him right off his shoulder. And as he tamped down and looked over to see who was calling him, it blew up. And it shot this 13-pound rod through his head. And it landed 100 feet away. So then he fell down. He felt confused. He tried to get up and walk around. I think I'll rub some dirt on it, shake it off. No, he didn't really say that, but he was injured. So the guys run over. He's still talking, but he's got this horrific hole through his head from the bottom of the right side up and out through his head. So they take him back down to the doctor. The doctor's really never seen anything like it, but he seems to be talking. He seems to be okay. He goes in and out of consciousness for a couple of days, and then he's kind of like he's coming around. He heals, his personality changes. Things that he liked, he didn't like before. Things that he could do, he really couldn't do anymore. Now, ultimately, he was able to fully recover as best he could, but his personality never came back. But he ultimately, lived a few years. But unfortunately, he had epilepsy, and so eventually, at the end of his life, he died during an epileptic seizure. He died of a result of that brain injury. But the thing that's important about Phineas Gage in that story is, in the 1840s, they really hadn't put together the science of where your personality comes from, how your brain works, what the brain even does. And so with Phineas Gage, they had this living example of somebody who had this massive brain injury, and it went through parts of his brain. It took out parts of his brain, almost like, a surgery. And so the before and the after and the comparison, different scientists who'd been investigating neuroscience over the years and had never really galvanized this, really helped shape neuroscience as we know it, based on the science that was developed around seeing this stuff with Phineas Gage. And so he became the most famous brain injury. And if you talk to anybody in neuroscience nurses, any neurologists, you're going to hear about Phineas Gage. So, pop quiz. We've got Tracy Morgan, George Clooney, Ben Roethlisberger, and Amelia Clark. Of these four, who has not had a brain injury? There's no wrong answer. Who has not had a brain injury of these four celebrities? All of these celebrities have had a brain injury. All of these celebrities have had a brain injury. Tracy Morgan's was well known on the New York Turnpike when he was hit by the truck. George Clooney had an accident in Italy. He was knocked off his bike and into a van. Ben Roethlisberger, gets hit every day at work. But then he also likes to drive his motorcycle and get hit by cars too. And then Amelia Clark, we just found out, who's Daenerys Targaryen, if anybody follows Game of Thrones. She had aneurysms. She had 2 aneurysms right after the first season, and has actually gone on the subsequent 8 seasons, having actually lost the ability to speak after the first season because of her aneurysm, and has actually rehabbed very nicely. So, trick question. How much does the adult brain weigh? We've got 7 pounds, 3 pounds, and 1.5 pounds. Now, this isn't a snide comment to well, I know my buddy's only got 1.5 pounds, because, but what do you think? 3 pounds. It's 3 pounds. It's 3 pounds of Jell-O, and that's right, good for you. Okay, so 3 pounds. What's the leading cause of brain injury in the United States? You've got motor vehicle accidents, falls, and violence, like gunshot wounds. Give me an answer. Falls, right here. There you go. Thank you. Falls is 35%, and that's very important for you guys because falls is a huge issue in skilled nursing facilities. If you're a fall risk, now when are you going to be a fall risk? You're going to be a fall risk when, I've had a stroke. I'm going to be a fall risk when I change my medications. I'm going to be a fall risk when I take certain medications or forget to take certain medications. I may just have balance issues. So falls is 35% of all brain injuries in the United States. How many Americans are treated in emergency departments, hospitalized, or die as a result of traumatic brain injury? Every year. Guess we've got 231,840, that's pretty specific. 2.9 million, no checking your phones while you're answering this, no Googling this. 1.2 million? 2.9 million people. 2.9 million people, all right, there you go. So 2.9 million people a year are affected by this, okay? And that's every single year, right? How many Marylanders are estimated to have received brain injuries in 2017? 300,000, 600,000, 900,000. Okay, Maryland has a helmet law. Yes, so what do you think? What's the answer? 600,000. That's a lot of people. How many Marylanders were estimated to be currently living with long-term effects of brain injuries in 2017? 120,000, that's exactly right. So there's a lot of people out there. Now, the vast majority of these people are going to be in the Baltimore, thank you, the Baltimore, Washington area, but there are thousands of people spread out throughout the entire state living with brain injury. So 2 definitions, TBI and ABI. You're going to hear both of them. We're going to use both of them. Most of the people that are going to be discussing here are going to be ABI, that's acquired brain injury. That's a brain injury that happens after birth. Okay, so it's not necessarily didn't happen during birth, it didn't happen in birth, it's not in utero, this is after the fact. So you're going to get, it also includes traumatic brain injury, it's a broader term, stroke, near suffocation, which is an anoxic or hypoxic brain injury, we'll be talking more about that, infections in the brain, and lack of oxygen. TBI is traumatic brain injury, that's the one that you think about car crashes. That's the one that you think about falls, that's the one that you think about assaults. Traumatic brain injuries was happening, you know, with the football players, you know, concussions, things like that. And then IEDs with our military personnel. But so ABI is the broader definition, TBI is the more refined definition. TBI is really the concussion definition, ABI is the umbrella. And so we try to talk in terms of acquired brain injury. So 80% of all brain injuries are mild loss of consciousness, which is less than 30 minutes. Post-traumatic amnesia is less than an hour. 10 to 13% are moderate brain injuries. Now I recognize that, you know, a mild brain injury is almost an oxymoron, because if you've got a brain injury and it affects everything you do, it doesn't matter if it's mild, moderate, or severe. It's affecting everything you do. But the reality is 80% are mild, 10 to 13% are moderate, and 7 to 10%, which is loss of consciousness greater than 24 hours. And then post-traumatic amnesia, I can't remember what happened. You know, I can't remember my accident, I can't remember the day after my accident, I can't remember, that's greater, so those are considered severe. Again, here's the breakdown we talked about. So falls, 40%, assault, MVAs are 14%, assaults, 11, and then struck by or against, those are going to be your falls, those are going to be your domestic violence cases, and then unknown or others, 20%. So gender, men are 2 times more likely to sustain a TBI than women. And if you watch YouTube channels, particularly Epic Fails, you're going to understand why. You don't ever see women jumping off sheds into pools. You don't ever see, you know, women doing BMX bicycles off of cliffs, but you see the guys. So it's 2 times more likely. Very young people and very old people are more likely to sustain a TBI. Those are going to be the kids under 5 trying to learn how to walk, and the people over 65 that are aging. And then adolescents due to intentional injuries. So those are going to be, you know, your high-speed car crashes and people jumping off crazy things, doing skateboard stunts. If you are violence-prone or exposed to people who are violence-prone, you're going to be more likely to sustain a brain injury. If you use substances or are exposed to people who use substances, you're more likely. That's when you get somebody who's an alcoholic husband or an alcoholic wife. You know, you're more likely to get domestic violence issues. And then socioeconomic status. Why do you think that might be? Why will you be more likely to? Well, you're going to be more susceptible. You're going to be in neighborhoods that may be more violent. You're going to be, having to be in situations that maybe, standing at bus stops in the middle of the night waiting, rather than somebody who's got a car that might be more violent. There's also those kinds of issues as well. You might not have access to preventive care. You might not have access to health care. You might not have insurance. And so those things that you may try to get treated, you may likely not do it. So civilian groups. So athletes, especially boxers, football players, and hockey players, victims of intimate partner violence and childhood physical abuse, people who use drugs, people who are homeless, and people with mental illness. These are all folks that typically have more than one brain injury. And if you start looking into somebody's past or somebody's history, or start talking to somebody about their experiences, you're probably going to be able to find, particularly in these groups, 1, 2, 3, or 4. So let's talk a little bit about the brain functions and possible changes. So the frontal lobe is primarily for our executive functioning skills. So that's right here. And so when you have somebody who's in sort of a front-end car collision and the airbag goes off, this is typically where it's going to hit, right? So if you have those kinds of issues, or if I fall and hit this part of my head, what's going to be affected? Problem solving, memory, language, motivation. Some people think, he won't get off the couch anymore. He won't do anything. He doesn't want to do anything but sit there and watch TV. Well, if he's got a frontal lobe, it kind of explains it, because the motivation is a problem. Judgment is a problem. Impulse control is a horrific issue. I don't think before I do. I don't think before I act. So if somebody's got a frontal lobe injury, for whatever reason, these are going to be the things that are affected. And I'm sure that in your head, you're kind of going through people that I work with, maybe that I work for, work with, work beside, that may, you may start saying, okay, well, maybe that kind of explains a little bit. And that's kind of what we're trying to do here. The idea is just sort of be aware that maybe, if these are the things that are affected, then maybe that's where the injury occurred. The temporal lobe, which is on the side, which is going to be smelling and tasting and perception. One of the things you don't think about, one of the people that we have dealt with in the past, a call we got and then have been working with, he's a chef. He also likes to dance on roller skates, do roller skate dancing. And at one point he slipped and fell, hit his head, and lost his sense of smell. That was his brain injury. He could still think, he could still, do everything, all of his ADLs were in place, but he just couldn't smell. So think about a chef who can't smell. And think about how smell affects taste and his ability to taste, So this thing that brought him not only this joy, this thing that gave him purpose in life, this thing that was his vocation, has now been completely affected by something as just, innocuous as falling down roller skating, right? Now, there are ways and things that you can do, and there are smell and taste clinics that are out there that can help you with something. But I mean, those are the kind of things that can happen. Aggressiveness and sexual behavior. Sometimes you'll have people that like to, people in wheelchairs, or people that are just out there trying to grab and talk, flirt with everybody, but kind of in a, they could have a temporal lobe issue as well. So the frontal lobes and the temporal lobes are critical when it talks about managing behavior and emotions. So any injury to those areas, you're going to have to be thinking about different strategies to deal with these sorts of behaviors and emotions. And so damage to these lobes are considered the fingerprint of traumatic brain injury, because if you think about it, car crashes are coming from the side and from the front a lot of times, So the parietal lobe and occipital lobe, the parietal is the back of the head, and the occipital lobe is back below in the lower part. So that's going to be touch and smell and spatial awareness. Spatial awareness, like I can reach over here and I can grab this and I can bring it back to me, or I can see that and I can find it, I can pick it up, I can throw it to my other hand, being aware of where it is, and then arm movement as well. And so the occipital lobe is responsible for vision. So if you always think about in the cartoons growing up, somebody gets hit in the head, what happens? Chirping birds, stars are going around, right? I can't see, my eyes blurry. Well, what's happening is you've injured that occipital lobe. And so the brain is actually, the sights are coming in through the eyes, but the brain isn't able to fully process them. And you'll find people occasionally have what is called field cuts. I can't see pieces that are just like, I can't see to the left. It's like having something covering up your glasses. And it's very challenging. So sustaining the injury. So this is where we're going to talk about coup and contre coup. So it's one of the only French words I know other than French fries. But coup, contre coup is the injury to the front. And if you think about it, the brain is encased in liquid inside the skull. And so if something hits the front, because it's in liquid, it's going to slosh back and hit something in back. So the coup is the initial impact, and then the brain sloshes around inside the skull, which is a hard bone. It's going to hit something else, and that's the contrecus. So you can injure something in the front. So if I get hit in the front of the head, then my brain shifts back, it can hit the back of the head as well. So even though the actual impact is here, I could be bruising and impacting the other part of the brain as well. The other thing is it's not necessarily a lacrosse ball inside a basketball. Okay, there's lots of bony protrusions, and every place you've got a little area in the brain that's those small little divots that you see, they've got pieces of bone that stick in there as well, and so that can impact, and that can cut, and that can slice, and so you've got these areas that are somewhat sharp in the brain, and so if it's sloshing around in there, that can impact it, and it can cut into it as well. It doesn't even have to have an impact. And so what this is actually showing is is blood in the brain. You can't really see it on the slide, but it's where just a sudden start and stop. I don't hit anything, I just jerk. Or I get hit, this is like when I don't get hit in the head playing football, but my head jerks back and forth. So I don't even have to have a direct hit to the head. So the thing we say with brain injury is, if you've met one person with brain injury, you've met one person with brain injury. And that sounds silly and trite, but it's the reality of brain injury. So every brain is different, every brain injury is different, every brain injury recovery is different, and the way you deal with people is different. And that's one of the greatest challenges of what we're doing, and one of the greatest challenges of what you guys have to do on an everyday basis is what works for this might not work for that. And what works for this person will absolutely trigger this person and set them off in a rage. So the idea is to try and be aware of these things so that you can carry them forward. But what are the possible physical changes? Well, coordination. So unsteady gait, poor hand-eye coordination, slow and slurred speech, tremors, and paralysis. So that's something, if you've seen somebody, those are sort of the physical manifestations. They have trouble walking. They have trouble standing up. They can't reach and find things. Visual deficits, like we talked about, when you injure certain parts of the brain and you have the field cuts, or your vision, or double vision. This can be another issue, that my eyes won't focus anymore. Everything's double. And I've either got to get special glasses to try and help me separate that, or I've just got to learn how to deal with which one of the two things am I looking at. Additional physical challenges. Seizures are hugely problematic. When you're affecting the brain and you're creating this situation where any kind of imbalance within the brain, can set off seizures. Deafness, hearing, and fatigue. Fatigue is actually pretty much universal. People wear out more often and sooner, and they get so exhausted and just have to take a nap, or they have to just decompress. And you have to be aware of that. So as the day goes on, if I'm dealing with somebody with a brain injury, they're more likely to either get more irritated, agitated, as we would normally, but then it's even more so because the fatigue is such a huge issue. Memory, short-term memory, long-term memory. Sometimes I can't remember what we just said to each other, but I can remember the names of my favorite teacher in first grade, 80 years ago. Sometimes I just can't remember any of that stuff. Processing, I can read it, but it doesn't make sense. I can read the same thing over and over again, but it's not computing for me. Expressing, aphasia is another issue. I can't find the words, or I say the wrong words, and that can also be frustrating, because I know that that's a coffee cup, but I say it's a fork. It's a fork. I can't get the word out. I can't find the word. And if I'm hearing myself and I'm aware, that can be extremely frustrating dealing with somebody like that, and that can really, so you have to be aware of that kind of thing. Problem solving, impulse control. I want it, I'm going to grab it. I'm thinking it, I'm going to say it. It's sexually disinhibited. I've got somebody that starts, like we talked about, flirting a little bit, or grabbing, or, being sexually inappropriate, and you'll see those kinds of things. So some of these behavioral changes, depression is huge. It's hugely problematic. It's from twofold. Both the brain is affected, so I'm depressed, but also if I'm self-aware that I can't do the things that I used to be able to do, I can't think the way I used to be able to think, that's very depressing. Or I lose my friends because I'm so weird to be around. That's very depressing. And so you get really sad and irritable if you're aware of it. Unawareness. I don't have a problem. You people have the problem. If you people would leave me alone, I'll be fine. Okay? That's very typical in some of the brain injuries that we talk to. Confabulation. Confabulation means taking pieces of facts and putting them all together. That can be challenging when you're dealing with somebody who's making up stories about, I'm getting robbed. People are robbing me. People are trying to kill me. You know, people are coming into my room at night and taking my stuff. Or, you know, I'm just making up stories as we go. And perseveration is another real challenge. And that'll drive you absolutely bonkers. If somebody's perseverating on something, you know, I gotta have the Jell-O, gotta have the Jell-O. Where's the Jell-O? We need the Jell-O. It's time for the Jell-O. You know, sort of that, the stuff that like Rain Man would doing, perseverating on Judge Wapner. Gotta have Judge Wapner. It's on at 4 for 30 minutes. You know, that's perseveration. And then anxiety. Just a general anxiety. So we've talked about depression is frequent, and it changes as the brain's changing. And so the other thing is that you have to think about is, when did the brain injury occur? Did it just happen, or did it happen a long time ago? Because as we age, we have the normal aging process. We have the normal things we have to deal with, the normal forgetfulness or the normal balancing issues. And then that can be exacerbated by, you know, the brain injury. So not only, you know, how long ago did it happen and how have, you know, your behaviors adapted to it? And then again, you know, as you age, the normal aging process gets added to this brain injury issue. Higher anxiety rates and disorders, obsessive compulsive, PTSD. So, you know, and you can find this in just about anything. With domestic violence, you have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, of course, you know, military issues. But any kind of trauma can trigger issues in this high-level anxiety, and where you may normally have had coping mechanisms to deal with it. Sort of, now your brain's not capable of creating those coping mechanisms. So you can have other disorders, psychosis, phobias, panic disorders. So what we can find maybe is if I had sort of a low-level anxiety or a low-level depression that I was kind of being treated, or I could just sort of deal with it, and my brain gets injured, I no longer have those coping skills. You know, I start showing signs of maybe paranoia. I start showing signs of bipolar disorder or something that I was able to mask with my coping skills, but now that my brain is I'm no longer able to, it can manifest. And then other times I've changed my brain organically to where it starts looking like some kind of mental illness. So between 37% and 51% of individuals hospitalized for TBI were intoxicated at the time of their injury or have a history of alcohol use or misuse. So that's pretty high. And that's going to be coming from, you know, you fall down when you get drunk. Falls are the #1 cause. You drive a car drunk and you wreck it. Motor vehicle accidents are the second leading cause of brain injury. Assaults. That's, you know, third leading cause of brain injury. Struck by or against. So I get into a fight at a bar, or I piss somebody off and get beat up. You know, alcohol and brain injury kind of go hand in hand in a lot of different things. Yeah.
Are you accepting questions now, or do you want
Actually, I'd prefer to accept questions at the end because the people that are on the tape aren't going to be able to, but we'll cover them, okay? So if you want to write it down or remember it, we'll talk about it. Promise. Okay? So, brain injury, anytime, anywhere, anyone, but there are some predominant populations, okay? So we have, as we talked about the categories of brain injuries, it's the young people and the old folks. So the youth, 0 to 4, more likely to be admitted to the emergency department for falls, you know? They run around, they fall down, they whack into stuff. More susceptible to abusive trauma, shaken baby syndrome, kids getting hit, you know, by their parents or getting beat up at school. Older children getting concussions, you know, skateboards with no helmets, bikes with no helmets, football, lacrosse, whatever. Those are issues. And then growing into a brain injury. So that's just sort of like I'm losing, you know, as I'm getting into my body, I'm losing real control, you know, and I'm more susceptible to accidents at that point. Older adults, you've got the structural changes in the brain. Like I said, the normal aging process is going to be altering your brain. You're at a higher risk for falls. That comes from things like vitamin D deficiency, lower body weakness, medications, blood thinners, you know, foot problems, balance problems, and of course vision. I walk into stuff because I don't see it as well. So Mount Sinai School of Medicine has been doing some serious research into this, and they talk about unidentified traumatic brain injury as the unrecognized major source of social and vocational failure. So what we find at the Brain Injury Association as well, if you peel away the onion of whatever's going on, you really only have to get one or two, particularly when it's behavioral or cognitive, you only have to get one or two layers of the onion peeled away before you figure out that there was a brain injury in there somewhere, and unidentified, oh, you know, yeah, he had that car crash, and that's when he really got angry all the time, or you know, when he came back from Iraq, that's when he really, you know, his personality completely changed, or you know, after they fell, they weren't able to really think as well. So some accommodations and strategies. So these are things that you know, you can do to support individuals with brain injuries, and things to be thinking about when you're sort of working with somebody with a brain injury. So the things that can be supported are attention, memory, decision-making, self-perception, sequencing, judgment, persistence, organization, monitoring, and then this initiation. These are all things that can be helped and modified. So one of the biggest things that you can do to support somebody with a brain injury in the environments in which you're working, you know, is structuring that environment, okay? And so by structuring that environment, that means, you know, setting up the things that make it easy for them to remember how to do stuff, so that they can then reduce the frustration of wanting to do that and initiate. So if you can think about, you know, this person that I go into their room every day and it's always a mess and they always can't ever find whatever they're looking for, you can either put it in a place always consistently and make sure that they do that. You can even, if depending on how they learn, you can create checklists for them so that they can go through. If it's not here, look here. If it's not here, look here, and make sure that they have that kind of thing. And I will assure you that whatever time you invest in trying to make that environment around them structured, whether it be in their room, whether it be in the cafeteria or wherever you take your meals, whether it be in the recreational areas, anything you can do to sort of create a structure and maintain that structure and work them through that, it'll cut down frustration on your part tremendously. It's a big, big help. So one of the things that we talk about is using journals and calendars. Depending on, you know, your person that you're dealing with, you know, they may love their phone and they can maybe deal with their phone and they may can remember to charge it, which is always a trick, and they can remember how to use the apps, but maybe not. So maybe having a journal or a calendar. When do we do this? What do I have to do? I'll perseverate. When's dinner? When's dinner? When's dinner? When are we going to eat? When are we going to eat? That could be something that could be put in a journal or a calendar so they can constantly remind them. Daily schedules, which I'm sure you may do. You may do in some semblance, but if it's somebody who you're recognizing has a challenge with that, that may be something that they could benefit from, and it would reduce your stress level immensely if you just hand them a sheet in the morning and say, here's what we're doing today. Yeah, it takes a little bit of extra time, but it doesn't mean what's next. What are we doing next? What's the next thing? Who am I doing it with? Where are we going? When are we doing that? When are we doing that, right? So a little bit of time there to structure it. Break tasks into small and manageable steps. You know, we really need you to be ready at 7 o'clock to go on the outing. What does that mean? Break it down. We need you to have, do your hair. Make sure you have your glasses. Make sure you have, the right kind of shoes, whatever. So encourage rest in low activity period. This is that, when you get into that fatigue. Make sure that when you're scheduling it, that they have an ability to say, okay, here's where we take a break. You can either take a nap or put in your earphones, your earplugs, and just rest so that we can do the next thing, so we can be ready for the next thing. Or schedule it to how they react. So the earplugs is screen out distractions. So that was where we went, that's where we got the idea of these. And actually these were really, when we just had our conference in March, we handed out a lot of these, particularly to the people that had brain injuries. It's like, this is great. These work really well. Pictures with faces and names, particularly when it's a memory issue. Short-term memory, long-term memory. So remember, you can have them hanging in their room. The people that come in and clean. The people that come in and help them. The people that are, the people at the front desk. You can maybe take a picture, and set it up just sort of step by step and lay it out. You can also do that with, things in the morning. So maybe I need a picture of them brushing their teeth. Maybe I need a picture of them combing their hair. Maybe I need a picture of them putting on their shoes. So again, like we talked about, one of the real tricks is consistency. Where is it? Where did I put it? Put it back the same place every time. And that's very, and these aren't things that are new and revolutionary, but they're kind of things that you don't really remember or think about, wow, that really could make a difference. Things that are commonly used, keep them close. And that's kind of like, if they use scissors and pens and paper, have them by their desk. Or if they need something in the refrigerator, have it in the refrigerator or near the refrigerator. If they need soap, keep it near to the sink and keep it filled. Cooking utensils near the stove. Now, I don't figure that the people that y'all are going to be dealing with are going to be doing much cooking, but if they do, the idea is to keep stuff in the area where you use it so you don't have to go chase it down. And put things in logical locations. If there is a place where the mail comes in and they're always losing it or they can't ever find it, or the check or the card or whatever, maybe create a mail basket by the door. Maybe put a hook for the key and have that be consistently there. And then have things that are used together in the same area. And the example here is, have a raincoat and a umbrella next to each other. Have their tracksuit and their sneakers next to each other and near each other. So some of the resources that are available to you, and these are a little bit small, but we can talk about it. There are support groups. There are support groups for individuals with brain injuries. If there's not one necessarily in your area, there are also online support groups for people that actually can use the computer and can do that. So those are unique. I know that you guys have got a Zoom room, and that's actually, if you have phones now, you can do Zoom rooms on your phone, and that's just essentially teleconferencing. And they have teleconference. We just set up a brand new support group these are folks that are parents of individuals that can't leave, they can't travel. So they've not been able to go to support groups. So we created a Zoom room, an online support group for them that they can log into. I think right now it's on Sunday nights, and so people that can't leave can actually benefit from talking with other people. The other thing you may find is support groups for caregivers. Some family members may benefit, as they watch mom age, or they watch dad age, or they watch, husband or wife, and get confused and are looking for resources and other people to talk to about going through these kinds of things. So those support groups are great. The Center for Independent Living. That may also not necessarily be one for you, but it's a good resource to know about the different, you can find the Center for Independent Living, every region has them. And if you go out online, or you can check our website, Centers for Independent Living, each region has them, and you can find about resources for people with particular issues, like smell and taste clinics in the area, or aphasia. My client's having trouble, or this person's having trouble speaking. Is there any kind of thing we can do to help them? Brain Injury Association, 1-800-221-6443, BIAMD.org. Our website gets around 14,000 hits a month. We receive somewhere between 300 and 350 phone calls a month. There are 5 area codes in the state of Maryland. Our last quarter, we received phone calls from 80 different area codes. Okay, now I recognize some of those people are cell phone users from Manhattan, and there's no way I'm giving up that area code from Manhattan. I lived, forever. But the vast majority of people were getting calls from out of state or in state. I'm moving into Maryland and I need help. I'm moving out of Maryland and I want to find some resources. My loved one is she just had a stroke. She's moving into town. What's available to us. So the Brain Injury Association, and then the Brain Injury Alliance in certain states as well. Maryland Access Point. Maryland Access Point is another resource you can call. That's supposed to be a one-stop shop for all kinds of resources. And there is an 800 number, and there's a website. You type in your issue, you type in your county, and it gives you all the resources for that issue. So Maryland Access Point. Division of Rehabilitative Services. There may be a call for some of your folks that may want to get an outside job. Division of Department of Rehabilitative Services can help them with job training and get that. Medical assistance and Medicaid. Many of the people that we're working with are on that, and they also provide additional resources in case management. And then you've got SSI and SSDI, so Social Security Insurance and Social Security Disability Insurance. If people that you are working with are eligible for that and they aren't receiving it yet, that may be something that's helpful. For people with brain injury, that is something that you can apply for. Depending on the age that the people that you're dealing with, they may already be receiving that. And then day programs, which may or may not be as helpful for the folks that you're dealing with, but they also are outside resources on activities that you can do. So, like, our group, we've got a group of folks with brain injuries that are living here. We're not necessarily going to come, but what kind of stuff are you guys doing? What kind of outings are you taking? And they can serve as a resource for that as well. Another thing when you're dealing with people with brain injury, Brainline is an outreach branch of WETA, which is the public radio and television station in DC. Brainline started as a grant from the government for people from the military with brain injuries, but they've now broadened it into people into all kinds of things. And so they have blog posts from caregivers, blog posts from individuals with brain injuries, lots of good resources, lots of good information, and so that is always a good resource. Our website is also very good. And then the Ohio Valley Center for Brain Injury Prevention and Rehab, they're doing more of the cutting edge stuff. And you'll hear a little bit more about the stuff they're doing in Ohio later on today, because they're really doing some cutting edge stuff on opioid addiction. All right, so contact information is 221-6443, BIAMD.org. I'm Brian Pugh at BIAMD.org. And so that's really kind of a quick overview to set up the other modules that we're going to be getting to later today.